That day, as my father and I were driving back from visiting my mother's grave, we were asked to pull over to the side of the road for a routine check. The police officer dealt with my father as usual, but his eyes flickered briefly when he looked at the documents. Then, unexpectedly, a young officer pulled me aside from the crowd of vehicles, his voice dropping low. "Listen carefully. Always be cautious of the dangers around you, especially those closest to you. Watch out for the very person you think will protect you." I was stunned, my heart pounding. Why would he say that? Was he referring to my father? What happened next dragged me into a horrifying truth, something I had never dared to imagine in my 34 years of life. My name is Owen Stanton, 34 years old, a self-made entrepreneur from Houston, Texas. I am the owner of PrimeFit, a chain of gyms and fitness centers, a brand I built with sweat, tears, and countless sleepless nights. From a young man with big dreams and empty pockets, I turned PrimeFit into a symbol of strength and determination in this city. Each gym is a piece of me, from the gleaming mirrors and heavy weights to every drop of sweat on the wooden floors. But if you ask me what I'm most proud of, I won't talk about money or fame. I'll tell you about my journey, a journey with no one to guide me, just me, my falls, and my resolve to get back up. But today, sitting in the SUV with my father, I no longer felt like the invincible man I usually am. The words of the police officer, Seth Mayer, according to the name tag on his chest, kept swirling in my mind like an ominous warning. I glanced at my father, Douglas Stanton, who was calmly driving, humming an old song. At 60, with salt and pepper hair and a tall, imposing figure, he still carried the dignified air of a seasoned man. My father is a probate court employee, respected by the community. He always appeared in crisp suits with a calm smile and a warm, steady voice that made people trust him easily. In Houston, they call him Mr. Stanton, a model father, an exemplary citizen, the kind of man anyone would want in their family. But I know my father isn't perfect. He had moments of temper, sudden outbursts when I was young, especially when my mother was still alive. My mother, the gentlest woman I've ever known, was always the bridge between my father and me. She passed away 5 years ago, taken by a sudden stroke. Since then, it's just been me and my father, but there's always been a gap between us that neither of us dared to address. I love my father, I respect him, but sometimes I feel something isn't right, a vague intuition as if he's hiding a secret. I grew up in a family that from the outside seemed perfect. My father was the pillar, my mother the keeper of the hearth, and I was the obedient son who studied well and later rose on his own. But when my mother passed, things began to change. I noticed my father became more obsessed with money, especially as PrimeFit started to grow. He often asked about the company, the revenue, the shares, with a curiosity I hadn't seen before. I thought it was just his way of showing concern. Or perhaps he was worried I'd stumble in the cutthroat world of business. But after the officer's warning today, I'm no longer sure. I still vividly remember the day my mother died. I was at one of my gyms just signing a lease for a new location when my father called. His voice trembled, a rare occurrence for a man who always seemed in control. "Your mother. She didn't make it, Owen." I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She lay there, cold, her face peaceful as if she were sleeping. My father hugged me, crying like a child. It was the first time I'd seen him so vulnerable. After the funeral, he became quieter, but also started meddling more in my life. He told me to invest carefully, to let him manage part of my assets to avoid risks. I agreed, not because I suspected anything, but because I trusted him. He's my father, the man who raised me, the one I always thought would protect me to the end. But now, as the car rolled down the road toward home, Officer Seth Mayer's words cut through the fog in my mind like a knife. I looked at my father, still humming his song, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. "Dad, at the cemetery today, did you notice anything strange?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me, raising an eyebrow, a faint smile crossing his face. "Strange? What's strange, Owen? You're always so suspicious." He chuckled lightly, but I noticed his eyes didn't quite meet mine. They flicked away as if he were hiding something. I didn't respond, just nodded and turned to look out the window. Houston passed by outside, the towering buildings, the bustling streets, and the glaring Texas sun. This city had watched me grow from a dreamy boy into a successful man. But now, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads where everything I'd ever believed in was starting to crumble. I closed my eyes, trying to shake off Officer Seth Mayer's warning, but it clung to me like a shadow. Watch out for the very person you think will protect you. Those words were like a stone thrown into a still lake, stirring ripples of doubt I had tried to bury deep. Over the past few months, strange things had been happening. Odd signals I once thought were mere coincidences, but now, pieced together, they began to paint a troubling picture. It all started about 6 months ago on a busy afternoon at PrimeFit's main office. I was reviewing revenue reports when my phone rang. A polite voice claiming to be from an investment firm called Horizon Capital came through the line. "Hello, Mr. Stanton, this is Michael Reed. We heard you're considering selling a portion of PrimeFit's shares. We're very interested and would like to discuss further. When are you available to meet?" I froze, pen still in hand, my mind reeling. Selling shares? PrimeFit was my life's work, the dream I built from the days of a handful of clients in a rundown gym on the outskirts of town. I had never considered selling, not even a small fraction. "Mr. Reed, I'm afraid there's been a mistake," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have no intention of selling shares." "Who told you that?" There was a pause on the other end. Then the man's voice grew awkward. "Oh, we received information from a reliable source. Perhaps I misunderstood. Sorry for the inconvenience." He hung up, but the call left me with an unshakable sense of unease. Who was this reliable source, and why would someone spread rumors that I wanted to sell my company? That wasn't the only incident. A few weeks later, a middle-aged man in a gray suit showed up at my main gym in downtown Houston. He introduced himself as a representative of a private investment fund and got straight to the point. "I heard you're looking to sell shares in PrimeFit. When can we sign the contract?" His question stunned me. I stared at the man, searching his eyes for any sign of confusion, but he looked deadly serious, as if he had been thoroughly briefed. "I'm not selling the company," I said, my voice hardening. "Who told you I wanted to sell?" He shrugged, flashing an awkward smile. "Just rumors in the industry. You know how lively the investment market is in Houston." He left, leaving me standing there, my mind in disarray. Who was spreading these rumors, and why were they targeting me? These calls and visits kept happening, not frequently, but enough to make me restless. I began to wonder if someone was deliberately spreading false information to pressure me. But for what reason? PrimeFit was thriving with steady revenue growth, and I had no obvious enemies in the industry. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then came the bank incident, which made things even more alarming. One morning, while sitting at my desk, I opened my banking app to check my account. I didn't do this often. My work kept me busy enough. But when I looked, something was off. In the statement, there were several strange transfers: $5,000, $7,500, then $10,000, withdrawn regularly each month for the past 3 months. The amounts weren't huge compared to my assets, but what chilled me to the bone was that I hadn't made those transactions. I called the bank immediately, my heart pounding. The employee on the line, with a monotonous voice, explained, "Mr. Stanton, these transfers were made under a power of attorney we received. We have a scanned copy of your signature. Everything is legal." I demanded to see the scan, and when the email arrived, I could hardly believe my eyes. The signature on the power of attorney was identical to mine. Every stroke, every curve, as if I had sat down and signed it myself. But I knew for certain I hadn't. Someone had forged my signature with terrifying precision. "Does anyone else have access to my account?" I asked, my voice trembling. The bank employee replied, "No, sir. Only you and those legally authorized." I hung up, feeling as though an invisible hand was tightening around my chest. Someone was manipulating my account, and they were clever enough to bypass the bank's system. But who? And why? I racked my brain searching for clues. Then I thought of my father. Not because I immediately suspected him, but because his recent behavior made me pause. Over the past few months, he had frequently brought stacks of legal documents to the dining table during my visits. "These are just minor formalities to legitimize your assets," he'd say, his voice calm but persuasive. "Sign them, Owen. I'll take care of everything." The stacks were thick with text, filled with convoluted legal jargon I didn't have time to read closely. At a glance, they seemed like power of attorney contracts, but I never paid much attention. My father always emphasized, "You're swamped with work. Let me handle this to ease your burden." I'd nod, sign, and think it was just his way of helping me. My father, the respectable man admired by all of Houston, could never do anything wrong, especially not to his own son, right? But now, looking back, I realized something was off about how he talked about those documents. He always avoided meeting my eyes when handing me the papers, and his voice, though warm, had a slight urgency, as if he feared I'd ask more questions. I told myself it was probably just greed, a desire to control part of my wealth to feel like the family patriarch again. After all, he was getting older, and I knew he was proud of my success, though sometimes that pride seemed tinged with envy. I never saw it as dangerous, not from my father, the man who taught me how to tie my shoes, who stood by me through my toughest days. But Officer Seth Mayer's warning today changed everything. I started piecing the fragments together. The strange calls, the rumors about selling shares, the mysterious bank transactions, and the stacks of documents my father brought me. Were they all connected? Was someone deliberately targeting me? Targeting PrimeFit? Targeting everything I had poured my sweat into building? And if the officer's words were true, could the person closest to me be my father? I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. No, it couldn't be. My father was the only family I had left, the one who stood by me when my mother passed. But then I remembered his evasive gaze, the way he insisted I sign documents I hadn't read carefully. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't help wondering, was there something I didn't know about my father? Was the man I had respected for 34 years hiding a secret? I stood up and walked out to the balcony of my apartment, looking down at Houston's glittering lights. I had built an empire from nothing, but now I felt like a trapped animal, unaware of where the predator lurked. I knew I had to act to uncover the truth, but I was also afraid that the truth would shatter everything I had ever believed in. The Houston night breeze swept through, carrying the characteristic Texas heat, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. I leaned against the balcony railing, my hands gripping so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Officer Seth Mayer's words echoed in my mind, sharp as a blade. "Watch out for the very person you think will protect you." Why had he said that? And why, when he looked at me, did his eyes hold such caution, as if he knew something I didn't? I closed my eyes, trying to replay the events of that afternoon, the trip to visit my mother's grave, the moment everything began to veer off course. As we did every year, my father and I drove to the cemetery where my mother rests. It was a gloomy day, the gray sky pressing heavily on my soul. I brought a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite flower, and stood silently before her headstone, engraved with her name. Margaret Stanton, a gentle mother, a devoted wife. My father stood beside me, silent, hands in the pockets of his suit jacket, his face as pensive as ever. I thought he was missing her too, but now, looking back, I realized he said very little. He just stood there, staring at the grave, his gaze distant, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. On the drive back, my father was behind the wheel, and I sat in the passenger seat, lost in my own thoughts. I missed my mother, her smile, the way she'd hug me tightly whenever I failed. But then a piercing police siren cut through my reverie. My father flinched, his hands jerking the wheel slightly, causing the SUV to swerve before pulling over to the side of the road. I glanced at him, noticing a fleeting moment of panic cross his face. Something rare for a man as composed as he always was. "What's going on, Dad?" I asked, but he waved me off, his voice curt. "Probably just a random check. Don't worry." A police officer approached, asking my father to present his documents. I sat quietly, watching through the window. The officer examined my father's driver's license, his tone even, but his eyes briefly darted toward me as if sizing me up. Then he asked my father to step out of the vehicle for further inspection. And another officer, his name tag reading Seth Mayer, approached my side. He was young, perhaps a few years older than me, with sharp eyes and a purposeful stride. He tapped lightly on the window, gesturing for me to step out. I complied, thinking little of it, assuming it was just routine. But when I stood face to face with him amidst the noisy hum of the highway, Seth Mayer lowered his voice, almost whispering, "Listen carefully. Always be cautious of the dangers around you, especially those closest to you. Watch out for the very person you think will protect you." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice faltering. But he didn't answer. He just looked at me once more, his gaze heavy with unspoken meaning, then turned away, leaving me standing there, my mind spinning. I glanced at my father, who was speaking with the other officer, his usual calm demeanor restored. He smiled, patted the officer's shoulder as if they were old friends. But I couldn't shake the unease. What did Seth Mayer know about me? About my father? Why had he chosen that exact moment to warn me? As we got back in the car and continued the drive, I couldn't bring myself to speak. My father hummed an old song, acting as if nothing had happened, but I felt an invisible distance growing between us. I wanted to ask him, to scream that I needed answers, but I couldn't. How could I confront the father who raised me, the man I had always respected? Yet Seth Mayer's words had planted a seed of doubt in my heart, and it was growing, minute by minute. Now, standing on the balcony, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of truth and deception. The strange signals from the past few months, the calls from banks, the rumors about me wanting to sell shares, the mysterious transactions in my account, and the stacks of documents my father brought to me, all felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to face. But Seth Mayer's warning was the final straw. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and opened my contacts. I scrolled to Connor Caldwell, an old college friend who was now a lawyer at a small but reputable firm in Houston. Connor wasn't just sharp, he was honest, a rare quality in a world full of calculations. I sent a brief text. "Connor, I need to meet you. It's serious. Tomorrow morning work?" The message sent, and I sank onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't know what I'd uncover as I began to dig into these suspicions. Maybe Seth Mayer was mistaken. Maybe it was all just a string of coincidences. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. If someone was trying to manipulate me, trying to take away what I'd built with my own sweat, I had to find them. And if, just if, that person was my father. I didn't dare finish the thought, but I knew I had no other choice. I looked out the window, the lights of Houston still twinkling as if daring me to act. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Tomorrow I would start. I would uncover the truth no matter where it led. But in that moment I felt only a profound loneliness, as if I were standing alone in the middle of a storm, unsure if I had the strength to weather it. The morning sun filtered through the apartment's glass windows, but it did nothing to ease the heaviness in my chest. I sat at the dining table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, and texted Connor Caldwell again. "Meet me this morning, 9 a.m., at the cafe on Main Street." Connor replied instantly, "I'll be there." I knew I could trust him. We'd known each other since college, when I was a young guy with big dreams and empty pockets, and Connor was an ambitious law student, always ready to debate anything. Now he was an independent lawyer, not working for big corporations, but his reputation was built on honesty and dedication, exactly what I needed right now. When I arrived at the cafe, Connor was already there, a cup of espresso in front of him, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew. He looked up, flashing a familiar smile, but his expression quickly turned to concern when he saw my face. "You look like you just ran a marathon through hell, Owen," he said, half joking, half serious. I sat down and got straight to the point. "I need your help. Something strange is going on. I think someone's trying to manipulate my assets and—" I hesitated, my voice faltering. "I'm not sure, but it might involve my dad." Connor raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I told him everything, the calls from banks, the rumors about selling PrimeFit shares, the strange transactions in my account, and Officer Seth Mayer's warning. When I mentioned the stacks of documents my father had me sign, Connor frowned, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "You need someone to dig into this, Owen. Not just a lawyer. You need a private investigator, someone good, discreet, and not afraid to get their hands dirty." He pulled out his phone, typed quickly, and handed me a business card. "This is Jack Ramsey, ex-FBI, now a private investigator. If anyone can uncover the truth, it's Jack." I called Jack that afternoon. He, a man in his 40s with a gravelly voice, lean build, and eyes sharp as knives, agreed to meet me at a small bar on the outskirts of Houston. As I recounted my story, Jack sat quietly listening, occasionally jotting notes in a worn leather notebook. "I'll need access to your bank accounts and those documents your father had you sign," he said, his voice steady but authoritative. "If someone's playing dirty, I'll find them. But you need to brace yourself. The truth isn't always pleasant." Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a haze, half awake, half dreaming. Each day, I waited for news from Jack while trying to keep things running at PrimeFit. But every time my phone rang, my heart pounded, unsure if it was the call that would change everything. Then one evening, Jack summoned me to his office, a small, cluttered room reeking of cigarette smoke and stale coffee. He placed a stack of documents on the desk, his expression grave. "Sit down, Owen. There are some things you need to know." Jack's initial findings sent a chill down my spine. He discovered that a portion of my assets had been quietly transferred through complex transactions, disguised as investments in obscure companies. The money from my personal account, those $5,000 to $10,000 withdrawals I'd noticed, hadn't just vanished randomly. They were systematically funneled into an account belonging to a company called Silver Oak Holdings. Jack's brow furrowed as he pointed to the company's name. I dug deeper. Silver Oak is a shell company set up to hide money flows, and guess who's linked to it? I shook my head, though a sinking feeling was already forming in my gut. Jack continued, his voice low. "Your father's name, Douglas Stanton, appears in the company's registration documents." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. "My father?" I muttered, my voice barely audible. Jack nodded, sliding a stack of papers toward me. "That's not all. I found something even more troubling. A medical report filed with the court a few months ago claims you're showing signs of mental instability. This document was used to request the court to consider appointing a legal guardian for your assets. And guess who's named as the guardian? Douglas again." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. A fake medical report? Mental instability? I was a 34-year-old entrepreneur running a gym chain worth tens of millions with no history of mental issues. Yet someone, and all signs now pointed to my father, had fabricated a story to strip me of control over my assets. I looked at Jack, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Anything else?" Jack flipped to another page in the documents. "The power of attorney forms with your signature. I had a few of them analyzed. The signatures are forged. Very sophisticated, but a handwriting expert confirmed they're not yours." He paused, locking eyes with me. "Owen, someone's trying to manipulate you. And all the signs." Point to your father." I sat there, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath me. My father, the man who taught me how to shoot a basketball, who stood by me at my mother's funeral. Could he be behind all this? I didn't want to believe it. Everything was still just pieces, what Jack called circumstantial evidence. There was no direct proof implicating my father, no letter or recording clearly showing him as the culprit. But the pieces fit too perfectly, too neatly to be mere coincidence. I decided to dig deeper myself. I requested the bank to send me detailed statements of all transactions from the past year. When they arrived, I spent an entire night poring over every line, every number. And there it was, funds from my account transferred to Silver Oak Holdings, the company Jack said was linked to my father. I called the bank again, asking for more details on the power of attorney documents. They sent me scans, and this time I examined them closely. The signature was eerily identical to mine, but upon closer inspection I noticed a small detail. A slight tremble in the final stroke, something my real signature never had. I sent the scans to another handwriting expert, and the result confirmed it. Forged. I sat silently in my apartment, the lights of Houston still twinkling outside, but they no longer inspired me. They felt like eyes watching me, waiting for my next move. I thought of my father, his evasive gaze, the way he always insisted I let him handle everything. I thought of my mother, her final days, and wondered if there was something I'd missed, something that could explain all this. But above all, I thought of Seth Mayer's warning. What did he know? And why had he chosen me to warn? I knew I couldn't stop. No matter how painful the truth might be, I had to see it through. I called Jack again, my voice firmer than ever. "Keep digging, Jack. I need solid proof. If my father is really behind this, I want to know everything." Jack nodded over the phone, his tone calm. "I'll find it, Owen. But be prepared. What we uncover next might not just be about money." I hung up, feeling like I'd crossed a line from which there was no turning back. I didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, take away what I'd built. And if he truly was behind it all, I would confront him, even if it broke my heart. In the days that followed, I lived as if trapped between two worlds. One where I was Owen Stanton, the confident entrepreneur behind the PrimeFit empire, and another where I was a son doubting the father I had revered for 34 years. Each morning I woke hoping it was all just a nightmare, but each night when Jack Ramsey called, the pieces of the truth came into sharper, clearer, and more painful focus. Jack arranged to meet me at his office one late afternoon as the Houston sky burned orange. The room was as cluttered as before, stacked with files and heavy with the smell of stale coffee. But this time Jack didn't sit. He stood, hands braced on the desk, his expression heavy with what seemed like a dreadful secret. "Owen," he said, his voice so low it sent a chill down my spine. "I've dug into your father's records at the probate court, and what I've found, it's not easy to say." He slid a thick stack of documents toward me, pages filled with text and legal seals. "Douglas Stanton isn't just the model probate employee," Jack began, his voice steady but icy. "He's a systematic fraudster. For over 2 decades, he's exploited his position at the probate court to forge wills and siphon off assets from the deceased. People with no one to protect them, no family to ask questions. There are at least 3 documented cases, but I'd bet there are more." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Forged wills, perfectly mimicked signatures, tens of thousands of dollars in assets funneled to non-existent heirs. One name kept appearing in the records: Douglas Stanton, the legal guardian, the estate executor. But what stopped my heart cold was a specific case Jack pointed out. "This woman, Helen Carter," he said, jabbing at a page. "She passed away in 2008, leaving an inheritance worth $200,000. The will was altered, and the entire sum was transferred to a shell company under Douglas's name. Her family had no idea, and when they found out, it was too late. Her son took his own life after losing everything." I looked up, my throat tight. "Took his own life?" I whispered, feeling as though someone had punched me in the chest. Jack nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, and it's not the only case. Douglas targeted vulnerable people, elderly, without family, those no one paid attention to. He covered his tracks expertly, exploiting legal loopholes, and his paperwork always looked legitimate on the surface. That's why he's never been caught. I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. The father I had admired, the man all of Houston called Mr. Stanton, was a cold-blooded con artist. I remembered him standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, flashing his calm smile before heading to work. I recalled the way he'd pat my shoulder, saying I was his pride and joy. Was it all an act? A perfect mask hiding his true self? Jack wasn't done. He pulled out another document, this time an internal report from a financial investigation agency. Douglas has been on the FBI's radar for years, he said. They're investigating quietly, but he's too careful, leaving no direct evidence. However, Owen... He paused, locking eyes with me. What's happening to you? The strange transactions, the forged power of attorney, the fake medical report. All matches his pattern. You might be his next target. Jack's words were the final blow, severing the last thread of trust I'd been clinging to. I thought of the money disappearing from my account, the shell company Silver Oak Holdings, the fabricated medical report claiming I was mentally unstable. It was all part of a larger scheme, and the man behind it was my father. I felt suffocated, as if the air in Jack's cramped office was being sucked out. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why would he do this to me? I'm his son. Jack shrugged, but his eyes were full of empathy. Some people are blinded by money, Owen. Maybe he saw you as the easiest target, someone who'd never suspect him. But I'll help you find the truth. The question is, how far are you willing to go? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked Jack to arrange meetings with people who could shed light on this. He set up a visit with the family of a past victim, the Thompsons, who had lost a significant inheritance due to a forged will handled by my father. When I stepped into their modest home on the outskirts of Houston, I met Ellen Thompson, a woman in her 60s, her eyes red as she recounted her story. Your father destroyed us, she said, her voice trembling. My mother left money so my kids and I could have a better life, but he took it all. We had no proof, no one believed us, he was too clever. I sat there, listening, feeling as though my heart was being crushed. I apologized, knowing my words could never make up for their loss. Next, Jack took me to meet Henry Walsh, a retired notary who had worked with my father. Living with regret, Walsh admitted to certifying documents for Douglas without thorough checks, trusting his reputation. I didn't know what he was doing, Walsh said, his voice heavy with remorse. But when I realized, I was too scared to speak up. If you need me as a witness, I'll do it. I owe it to the people he hurt. I returned to my apartment late that night, my mind flooded with pieces I could no longer deny. My father had orchestrated a perfect plan, using a fake medical report to have the court strip me of control over my assets, transferring PrimeFit shares through the shell company Silver Oak, and even swaying some members of my board, people I'd recently noticed acting strangely, avoiding discussions about the company's future. It was all part of a game he'd played many times before, but this time the target was his own son. I stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I saw my mother's eyes, gentle and full of love, but also a trace of my father, his determination, his resolve. But I wasn't him. I wouldn't let him take what was mine, wouldn't let him turn me into another victim on his long list. This was no longer just suspicion. It was a real threat, right in front of me. I couldn't wait for the authorities to act. They'd been watching my father for years without catching him. If I wanted to protect PrimeFit, my mother's legacy, and myself, I had to confront him myself. I picked up the phone and called Jack. Get everything ready, I said, my voice hard as steel. I want to end this, and I'll do it my way. I knew a battle lay ahead, not just with my father, but with my own heart. But I was ready. No matter how painful the truth, I would face it, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, destroy what I had built. In the days following my call with Jack, I lived in a strange state, half resolute, half shattered. Each night I sat in my apartment, the twinkling lights of Houston outside like eyes watching my every move. I planned meticulously, step by step, just as I had built PrimeFit from nothing. But this time it wasn't about creating. It was about dismantling the perfect mask my father had worn for years. The opportunity came when my father called to invite me to his retirement ceremony, a lavish event at a convention center in downtown Houston. Douglas Stanton was to be honored as an exemplary citizen, a dedicated probate employee, a respectable father. I stared at the invitation, at the photo of him smiling warmly, and felt my stomach twist. This would be his final stage, and I would be the one to pull the curtain down. I worked with Jack to gather every piece of evidence needed. In my leather briefcase were documents I'd reviewed dozens of times. Bank statements showing funds funneled to Silver Oak Holdings, my father's shell company. Expert analyses confirming the forged power of attorney documents bearing my signature. An original will from a past victim, obtained by Jack from archives, clearly contrasted with the fake version my father used to steal assets. And sworn statements from Ellen Thompson and Henry Walsh, the remorseful notary, ready to testify. I kept these documents close like a talisman, a reminder that I couldn't falter, no matter how much my heart ached. The day of the retirement ceremony arrived, an evening bathed in lights and laughter. The hall was elegantly decorated, adorned with banners praising my father's career. Douglas Stanton, Houston's exemplar. Former colleagues, local officials, and community acquaintances gathered, raising glasses to toast the man they believed to be a paragon of integrity. I stood in a corner of the room, clutching a glass of wine, my eyes fixed on my father. He wore a gray suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his smile as calm as ever. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and he rushed over to embrace me, laughing as if we hadn't seen each other in years. But now I no longer saw him with the admiration of my youth. He was not the exemplary, devoted father I once knew. The party buzzed with energy. Midway through, my father took the stage to speak, his warm voice resonating as he recounted his years of service at the probate court and his pride in watching me grow. A simmering anger rose within me. Every word he spoke was a knife, not because it was a lie, but because it was so perfectly, convincingly crafted. Throughout my career, he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd, I've always believed family is the foundation. My son Owen is proof of that. He built PrimeFit from nothing, and I couldn't be prouder. The crowd applauded, some turning to smile at me. I nodded back, but inside I wanted to scream. Proud? If he was proud, why had he tried to take everything from me? I waited until his speech ended as the applause still echoed. Then I stepped onto the stage, gripping the microphone, my voice calm but resolute. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, locking eyes with my father. But there's another story about Douglas Stanton that everyone needs to know. The hall fell silent, all eyes on me. My father frowned, his smile faltering, though he maintained his composed demeanor. Owen, what are you doing? He asked, his voice low but sharp. I didn't answer. Instead, I signaled the technician to project the bank statements Jack had prepared onto the large screen. These are transactions from my personal account, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. Tens of thousands of dollars regularly transferred to a company called Silver Oak Holdings. Who's behind this company? Douglas Stanton. The crowd began to murmur, some glancing at my father with questioning looks. He stood tall, hands in his pockets, his voice still calm. Owen, you're mistaken. This is just a misunderstanding. I'll explain later. But I didn't stop. I continued, displaying the handwriting analysis. These are power of attorney documents I supposedly signed, authorizing the transfer of my assets. But experts have confirmed the signatures are forged. The murmurs grew louder, like a wave beginning to swell. I showed the original will of Helen Carter, juxtaposed with the forged version my father had used. This is proof he forged wills, stealing assets from those who could no longer defend themselves. The hall erupted in whispers and shocked glances. For the first time, my father's composure cracked. He stepped closer to me, his voice low but menacing. "Owen, stop this now. You're destroying our family's reputation. What do you think you're doing?" I looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of remorse, a hint of the man I once loved, but all I saw was anger and panic. "I'm doing what you never did, Dad," I replied, my voice cold. "I'm telling the truth." He tried to regain control, turning to the crowd, his voice trembling but still playing the victim. "This is a smear campaign. I've dedicated my life to Houston, and now my son, because of misunderstandings, is trying to ruin me." A few people nodded as if ready to believe him. At that moment, the hall's doors swung open, the hinges creaking as if tearing through the tense atmosphere. A group of men in black suits wearing FBI badges entered. Leading them was Seth Mayer, the officer who had warned me on the highway. He strode to the stage, his voice icy. "Douglas Stanton, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of forgery, financial fraud, and misappropriation of assets. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I looked at my father, my heart pounding. His face, already twisted with anger, turned pale as the FBI team approached. He stepped back, eyes wide, as if unable to believe what was happening. "You're making a mistake," he shouted, his voice breaking, no longer maintaining its usual calm. "I'm Douglas Stanton. I've done nothing wrong." But as two agents grabbed his arms, the sharp click of handcuffs cut through the air like a blade. He struggled, turning to me, his eyes blazing with a mix of desperation and hatred. "Owen, you did this to your own father? You'll regret this, you traitor." His words stabbed into my chest like a knife, but I stood there motionless, watching as he was escorted out of the hall. The crowd was stunned, some covering their mouths, others turning away, unable to witness Mr. Stanton, the symbol of integrity, fall in disgrace. Seth Mayer paused beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder, his voice low but firm. "You did the right thing, Owen. We've been tracking him for years, but you gave us the evidence we needed." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was exposed, but also a searing pain, as if my heart had been torn apart watching the father I once loved being led away, his true face revealed to all. The clinking of my father's handcuffs echoed in my mind as I left the convention hall, the flashing lights of reporters' cameras burning into me. News of Douglas Stanton's arrest spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Houston's major newspapers were plastered with headlines. "Veteran probate employee arrested for financial fraud," screamed the bold front-page title of the Houston Chronicle. Local TV stations replayed the scene of my father being escorted away. His face contorted, his eyes wild with panic, no trace left of the revered Mr. Stanton. I sat in my apartment, staring at the TV screen, feeling as though I were watching a movie about someone else's life, not mine. Meanwhile, the FBI moved swiftly. My father was taken to the Federal Detention Center in Houston, where he faced relentless interrogations to uncover the full scope of his fraudulent schemes. His bank accounts were frozen, from personal ones to those tied to shell companies like Silver Oak Holdings. His office at the probate court was searched, documents and computers seized. I imagined FBI agents flipping through stacks of files, each stamp my father once took pride in, now serving as evidence against him. Properties in his name, a vacation home in Galveston, an apartment in Dallas, were also frozen pending investigation. Each detail reported in the press felt like another knife twisting in my heart. The FBI began summoning my father's past victims. Ellen Thompson, who had shared her family's pain with me, was among the first to agree to testify. But there were others, faces I'd never known, people too afraid or powerless to speak out before. An elderly man who lost his only home, a single mother robbed of an inheritance meant to support her children. They emerged, carrying heart-wrenching stories of the devastation my father had caused. Each testimony was another piece in the dark puzzle of his true character. In the meantime, I worked with Connor Caldwell to regain control of PrimeFit and my assets. The forged power of attorney documents were voided, and the illicit transactions reversed. Sitting in the lawyer's office, signing papers to restore ownership of my company's shares, I felt as though I were reclaiming pieces of my soul. But even though PrimeFit was back in my hands, there was no joy in the victory. Instead, there was a cold void where family ties once existed. Then one afternoon, while I was in Jack Ramsey's office, Seth Mayer appeared with a new stack of documents. He sat down, his expression heavy, and slid the papers toward me. "Owen, you need to read this, but brace yourself." I picked up the documents, my hands trembling, unsure what could be worse than what I already knew. But as I turned to the first page, the world seemed to collapse again. Among my father's list of victims was a name I never expected to see. Margaret Stanton, my mother. I looked up at Seth, my voice breaking. "No, it can't be." "My mother?" Seth nodded, his eyes full of empathy. "Before your mother passed, she drafted a will leaving you a trust fund and some stocks. Douglas forged documents and diverted all of it to himself. You didn't know because he covered it up so perfectly." I felt suffocated, as if the air in the room had been sucked out. For the past 5 years, I thought my mother had left me only memories, handwritten letters, and her gentle smile. I had no idea she'd tried to secure my future only for my father, the man she loved and trusted, to steal it all. The pain was like a razor-sharp blade, not just because of my father's betrayal, but because my mother, the woman I loved most, was also his victim. I sat there, head in my hands, trying not to scream. Jack placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "I know it hurts, Owen, but you did the right thing by exposing him, not just for you, but for everyone else, including your mother." Months later, Douglas Stanton's trial took place at the federal courthouse in Houston, drawing national attention. My father faced a litany of charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and people who once knew him as Houston's hero. I sat in the front row, my heart heavy, watching him stand at the defendant's podium. He still wore a suit, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes no longer held their usual confidence. Instead, there was exhaustion and a hint of something like regret, or perhaps just desperation at being cornered. The prosecution presented their case relentlessly. They projected bank statements, forged power of attorney documents, altered wills, and victim testimonies onto the screen. Ellen Thompson stood, her voice trembling but resolute, recounting how my father had stolen her family's future. Henry Walsh, the notary, admitted his role and pointed to my father as the mastermind. Then it was my turn. I took the witness stand, my father's eyes on me, a mix of pleading and hatred. I recounted everything: the suspicious transactions, the fake medical report, and the devastating truth about my mother. Each word felt like a knife, stabbing not only him but also myself. Through his lawyer, my father tried to negotiate a plea deal, admitting to lesser charges for a lighter sentence. The prosecution refused, emphasizing that the scale of his crimes warranted no leniency. He stood, his voice weak but calculated. "I only wanted to protect my family. My son, Owen, misunderstood my intentions." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt no pain. I saw only a man who had lost everything to greed, now clinging to the last shred of his dignity. The trial stretched on for weeks, each day carving a new wound in my heart. But when the jury declared him guilty on all counts, I felt a strange relief. Not joy, but a sense of freedom. Freedom from the mask I'd lived with for 34 years. As my father was led away, he didn't look at me again. Perhaps he knew there was nothing left to salvage between us. The courtroom gradually emptied, the crowd's murmurs fading. I stood alone, still clutching the documents the FBI had returned to me. They were proof of what I'd lost, not just assets, but my faith in family. Yet I also knew I had to move forward, carrying this pain to build a new future, one where my mother somewhere might be smiling. In the weeks following the trial, I worked tirelessly with Connor Caldwell to fully restore control over PrimeFit. The forged power of attorney documents were nullified, the company's shares were transferred back to me, and the inheritance my mother had left, a trust fund and stock stolen by my father, was finally returned to its rightful place. Each signature I placed on those documents was a step toward reclaiming what was mine, but also a fresh cut to my heart. I sat in my office gazing at Houston's skyline where towering buildings glimmered under the Texas sun. PrimeFit remained my empire, stronger than ever, but this victory brought no joy. Instead, there was a cold emptiness where the shadows of my father and mother, where family once stood. Each night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to summon my mother's image, her gentle smile, her warm voice telling me bedtime stories. But now I could only see her in painful fragments of memory. She had tried to protect me, leaving me a piece of her future, only for my father, the man she loved and trusted, to betray us both. I wondered what she would say if she were still here. Would she forgive him as she always did during his outbursts? Or would she stand by me, hold my hand, and tell me I'd done the right thing? That pain drove me to act. I couldn't erase what my father had done, but I could do something to make amends, even if only partially. I established a fund in my mother's name, the Margaret Stanton Fund, to support victims of financial fraud, people like Ellen Thompson, like Helen Carter's family, who had lost everything to someone else's greed. I allocated a portion of PrimeFit's profits to it, organized fundraisers, and partnered with nonprofits to ensure those who had been hurt had a chance to rebuild their lives. Each time I met a victim and heard their story, I felt as though I was indirectly atoning for my father's crimes. But deep down, I knew nothing could erase the stain he'd left behind. One afternoon, while I was working in my office, Connor walked in carrying a cup of coffee and a weary smile. "You okay, Owen?" he asked, sitting across from me. I shrugged, not wanting to answer. How could I be okay when the father I once revered was behind bars, and the mother I loved turned out to be one of his victims? Connor placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "You did what most people wouldn't dare. You faced the truth no matter how painful. That's strength, Owen." Strength. I repeated the word in my mind, but it felt hollow. I didn't feel strong. I felt exhausted, like a soldier surviving a battle, carrying scars that would never heal. But Connor was right about one thing. I had faced the truth. And that truth taught me a harsh lesson. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. True family isn't about shared blood. It's about those who don't betray you, people like Connor, like Jack, like the PrimeFit employees who stood by me when everything fell apart. They were my new family, and I would protect them the way I wished my mother had been protected. I heard updates about my father from Seth Mayer. He was still in the federal detention center awaiting his final sentencing. Seth said he was still trying to negotiate, contacting lawyers to broker a plea deal in hopes of a lighter sentence. Part of me wasn't surprised. My father was always cunning, always knew how to slip through the cracks. I didn't know if he'd succeed, but I knew one thing. I was no longer afraid of him. Whether he managed to reduce his sentence or found a way to come back, I was strong enough to face him. I was no longer the boy who saw him as a hero. I was Owen Stanton, the man who built PrimeFit from nothing, who survived the greatest betrayal of his life. I stood up and walked to the balcony, looking out at Houston sinking into the sunset. The city's lights flickered, no longer eyes challenging me, but now small flames reminding me that I still had a future to build. I thought of my mother, of what she wanted me to become. A man who was strong but also knew how to love and forgive. I wasn't ready to forgive my father, and perhaps I never would be, but I could forgive myself for trusting him too long, for not seeing the truth sooner. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening Texas air. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The wounds in my heart still bled, and my father's shadow would always be a part of me. But I knew I would keep going, not because I was strong, but because I had to. For my mother, for my father's victims, and for myself. I looked out at the city and whispered to myself, blood isn't everything. Family is those who don't betray you. With that thought, I turned back, ready to face whatever lay ahead.